Welcome again to our listeners to our frequent podcast called Wear Many Hats, inspired by Ethan Hawkey. Throughout the year, I, David Punter, the Business Development Director for Hawkey Cleaning and Support Services, shall be interviewing prominent facilities management and procurement subject matter experts across a range of industry sectors. It's these people with their wealth of knowledge and experience that will inspire the next generation of professionals coming through the industry. Our objective is to share our guests' stories and experiences to help motivate, engage, and inspire others into the industry. Through Wear Many Hats podcast, we hope our listeners will gain new perspectives, insights, and learn about strategies to develop their careers in the facilities management or procurement business. It gives me great pleasure to introduce
Magnus MacAulay, but please call me Mac.
And you are from?
London Bridge City.
Thank you for that. And without further ado, I'd like to start with a series of questions. I'm not going to put you too much on the spot here, Mac, but just tell me a little bit about, what was your journey in terms of entering into the career of facilities management?
It's really interesting, actually. I think, like a lot of people, we find ourselves in facilities management, property management, almost by accident. I, many years ago, had a brief career in the military.
Okay.
Which took me all around the world from where I'd grown up in the Highlands of Scotland. I arrived in London primarily because my then girlfriend was here, and it seemed to make sense. And I thought that it'd be quite easy to find work in London. As it happened, it wasn't. And I bounced around through a number of roles that I think a lot of ex-military veterans do. I worked for a security contractor and did reasonably well in that business, and eventually found myself mobilizing contracts in the West End. As a part of that, was working with managing agents and property managers, building managers, and was intrigued by the variety of the work that they were undertaking, the range of responsibilities that they had. And as one does, you contribute, you add a bit of value, you listen and you learn. And I eventually left that business, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do next. It wasn't really fulfilling me. I'd done well by them, and I think they had benefited from my time with them. But it was time for me to move on, and I left that business to go and think about what I wanted to do next. Still in London, still not earning particularly a lot of money, and I got a phone call, and they said we've just acquired a large property in the West End. Your name came up in conversation. The team running it aren't going to transfer across. We've got a hole to fill. Would you be interested in coming in for an interview? And that arose purely because I had left some good impressions with some fairly influential decision makers.
Okay.
And on the back of that, I stepped into in hindsight, which was pretty big, responsible operational facility management role.
And where was that building? That was in the West End, or
it was in the West End, one of the largest buildings in the West End, at least at that time. This is a while ago. Berkeley Square House.
Okay, I know it.
Which takes up the entire east side of Berkeley Square. Huge building in terms of square footage, not particularly tall and not particularly pretty, but yeah, well north of 500,000 square feet. And with all sorts of businesses in it and interesting retail around it. And really, you ask about the journey into FM. It was a door that opened for me because I had worked very closely with and left good impressions with people doing what I do now.
Okay.
And I think that is something I've always held on to. Not everyone arrives in this through an academic route. I think increasingly these days there are academic routes into facilities management and estates management. But at the time, really, there wasn't. It was an emerging sector and an emerging discipline, and no one really knew what it meant. So just by being professional, being focused, leaving good impressions with one of the major managing agents operating in London at the time, when that opportunity came up to look for an operations manager, as the title was, I said yes, and they said yes, and I haven't looked back. So really, really accidental.
So what Sorry, what was that managing agent that was looking after the Berkeley House at the time?
It was a part of what used to be GVA.
Okay.
GVA Grimley became GVA and became various other things subsequently. I suppose that business is now Avison Young, actually.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. And I mean, what's interesting, I've come across is that a lot of people from a military background discipline have entered into the FM industry. And do you think that helped you in any way?
I think it did. It certainly helped, although I didn't necessarily enjoy it. It certainly helped in the security industry initially.
Okay, yeah, definitely.
But moving into FM, I think it is quite. You need to be quite organised and quite structured and quite disciplined.
Yeah.
Even if you're not particularly technical, you're dealing with a range of risks and responsibilities in what can be quite a high tempo, dynamic environment. You've got to be a part of a team that you can trust. You've got to rely on people. You've got to trust people. And I think all of those things brought together mean that someone who's had a military experience, no matter which service or for how long, not everyone succeeds, but I think it does lend itself towards people who have had that, who have needed to have had that structured, disciplined approach. It's also about teamwork and it's also about relationships. And I think the idea in the military that there's a hierarchy and there is an implied respect required for people in certain roles makes puts occupiers quite rightly and well, tenants as we used to call them, but occupiers, businesses in our properties, in multi-occupied properties, it puts them on that pedestal. So there is a respectfulness about the approach to business generally. And that professional conduct comes from the training that one received in the military.
Right. I mean, the reason why I asked this, Mac, is that there will be some of our listeners that are coming from out of the military and maybe looking at this as a role to go into. So what is it about that you like about your facilities management role, let's say now?
I think there is a very obvious answer to that question, which is variety, and I think a lot of people would reach for that. There really are so many aspects and facets to the role, to the industry. So I think I love the fact that every day is a school day, every day is a learning day, and even for someone like myself who's probably been around too long, 20 odd years I've been doing this now, I think there are still lots of things to learn. The world around us keeps changing. The expectations of employees and crucially our clients' employees changes. The world has changed enormously on the back of the recent pandemic and the changes that brought to all sorts of sectors. So the variety is certainly something that keeps me going, keeps me learning, keeps me wanting to feel as though I'm able to contribute and contributing. And that is a massive pull factor for me. I'm not particularly academic. I like to learn through experience, through interaction, through relationships. And I think that leads me to the second point, which is people.
You like being part of a team and having a team with you.
Being a part of, leading it, or being a part of it, supporting a high-performing team. I suppose there's synergies there again with the ex-military idea. But being a part of a team, at the end of the day, it's not really about the bricks and mortar.
No.
It is about the people, either the businesses that are in our properties that we're looking after, providing services to, or the people that we need to manage and lead to deliver services directly. Extended supply chains. There are nearly 300 people involved in delivering services at London Bridge City, for example. It's by no means the largest estate, but that is a lot of people to take in a certain direction, depending on what the appetite of the landlord is, what the appetite of the businesses that work there are. So, variety, the learning opportunities, which never end if you have an open mind, and the people, the relationships you build, some of which are there for life. I've made lifelong friends and allies through this business.
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, you mentioned there's a lot of things to learn. So for Mac, what else is there to learn?
I think primarily the learning piece for me has been about people. I made a decision around about a year ago, a little bit more, when a significant change happened in my leadership team. So quite a senior colleague left the structure that I support. And the business said to me, "What are you going to do? You know, what do you want to do to replace this? Is it more of the same?" And I said, "No. Where I work currently at London Bridge City, you know, my reference points now are 3 years at London Bridge City. Where I work now, it's not the easiest place to work. It's high tempo, a lot of scrutiny, a lot of change, a lot of development work. So we needed to build a team that could deliver all the time, on top of its game. How do you sustain a high-performing team over a period of time when there isn't really a point where you say the job is done, so it doesn't stop?"
Okay.
And I was looking at what other managing agents and developers were doing with their offer, particularly in the city. And I really liked what I saw at 22 Bishopsgate, which was being mobilized by JLL.
Correct.
And they had established a community culture role. And I was aware of the individual. And I said to the business, I want one of those. Because the part of our roles in this high tempo environment that always get squeezed are the time we should spend with our colleagues, sitting down with them, checking in with them, learning and development, coaching, mentoring, the conversations over coffee. How are you doing? What do you need from me? They always get squeezed because we are surviving the day. We're moving on to the next thing. What's the next priority? And actually, it's not HR, and it's not a counselling service. It's people and culture, and that's what I reached for. So it is for me. It is about people, and it is about continuing to understand how do you build a high performing team and then sustain it indefinitely, actually. And that team may not always be made up of the same individuals, but the DNA has to be sustained through a prolonged period of time. So I hired a head of people culture, and I think what I'm continuing to learn, and she is a particularly special individual. I think the job description itself was always going to bring a step change to my part of the organization. But I think beyond that, she brings a lot of herself, which is quite special. And it has just super boosted our ability to build a culture that is designed, if you like, to allow people to succeed. What does success look like? It looks like A, B, C. How do we get there? We make sure we have all these cultural elements involved. Now, before I'd arrived at LBC and was met with this significant challenge, huge team, parts of it working well, parts of it, frankly, needing to improve, lots going on, huge change program, bringing that through in terms of COVID and the lockdown. The cultural shift had been something that I wanted, and I knew it would challenge me. I have learned so much. So I think it is really about people that we continue to learn.
But I mean, Matt, it's very from a cleaning perspective, which is all about people. It's very refreshing to hear what you're saying about people and culture and things. It's just as a side issue, just for our listeners to understand. I believe that the London Bridge City sits in the sort of Hayes Galleria and along that wharf bit there, so that people understand where it is. It's a very prominent piece of both public realm, offices, retail. I don't know. Is there residential that comes under your
a small
amount?
Is
okay,
yeah.
So just so people know what area of London we're talking about, a very beautiful area to go. It's just sort of adjacent to HMS Belfast there.
Yeah.
So that people
come and see us.
People come and come and see us, as it were. Bit of a plug for the area as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you're working obviously in the managing agent side, so that kind of moves us on there to what skills do you think are required to do your job?
I think there are, the point being is that there are many facets to the role. Primarily, I think as in a more visible role, in a more visible leadership role, it is about people.
Okay.
It's about leadership, which is not the same as being a manager. I think that, we're looking at behaviors, we're looking at support, we're looking at making sure that culture exists in the first place. One has got to have strong sort of financial acumen. You've got to have a handle on your budget. We are, as a managing agent, inevitably spending other people's money.
Correct.
And now, there's never been a good time to not pay attention to to that, in the past, it's always been important. The Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors has, for a long time set out best practice around the management and reporting on service charges. But I think in the cost of living crisis, the impact of utilities costs on our service charges, certainly in building older buildings, older stock that don't operate as efficiently as some of the shiny new, very efficient BREEAM excellent buildings that are being pulled out of the ground at the moment do. You've got to have an eye for the numbers. Risk management is huge.
Okay.
Compliance and risk management. So an understanding of the regulatory framework that we're operating in is really important. It's not moving as fast, actually, as it did, I think, in the noughties. There was a lot of regulatory change then. But you've still really got to keep your eye on where best practice is going, where statutory compliance is going.
Okay.
And at the moment, topically, it's very much about fire, and quite rightly so.
Yeah.
On the back of the Grenfell disaster, horrific tragedy, mistakes made there. Finally, there are pieces of legislation coming through that will make it incumbent on landlords and managing agents and other parties to do it right, to keep our buildings safe. So I think the regulatory framework and the compliance piece, at the end of the day, we are all risk managers of one size or shape. So I think having that understanding of risk management and prioritizing risk is important. And then it's operations, and that is linked to the people piece. I think we are managing big operations, some very highly skilled components, some fairly low skilled, low wage, low salary skilled jobs. To have an understanding of a broader understanding, to understand how those contracts work, what they're supposed to deliver, to measure value is really important. So, we have a huge variety of relationships through the extended supply chain. So that operational contract management piece is really important. And I mentioned their measurement, and I think the final piece, which is important, is to have an understanding of the need and value of data in the modern world. Data is so powerful. It always has been. We've always collected data. I think in the past we've probably collected data and not really done anything with it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Whereas nowadays, with the Internet of Things and everything being interconnected, we have to realize the power of data to justify decision making, to justify expenditure. It is the ultimate business case. Okay. Empirical data talks volumes about.
Yeah. I mean, interesting. You mentioned about the sort of the lower salaries levels of staff and stuff, and I'm just going to ask a sort of bullet point opinion here. Is that, I mean, what's your view on the paying the real living wage, i.e., the $11.95?
Well, personally, I have always reached for to be ahead of the London living wage.
Okay.
If I've been fortunate, I've worked for clients who have signed up to the Living Wage Foundation, and recognise that. Not all do, and not necessarily in a sort of deliberate sense, but just because it's not on their radar. But I've always championed that, and we do reach for the best possible deal we can get for our people. People who are working at night, having to travel in the early hours of the morning, and work in all weathers in the public realm, and so on and so forth. So we always try and track the London living wage as a minimum and keep ahead of it.
Are they paying that at London Bridge? Yes,
and north of it.
Okay, that's excellent. I think it is. It's now with the cost of living and things, it's the right thing to do. But it's not about me and our opinions. But it's. I
think the consideration there needs to be, there's huge value in retention and continuity. There's huge value in actually being seen, authentically seen, to do the right thing by people who are working hard. So, but there is a value to it. I mean, we don't just do these things for no reason. There is a business case. There is a business sense behind all it. If you lose good people because they can move to the other side of London and earn a little bit more, that costs. It costs in terms of time and resource, filling that role, training that role. And I think that investment is in my mind, is relatively easy to justify. Of course, the business case has to be there, and the consideration I make is the world we live in now. There is a technological solution to just about anything you can imagine, and that's where data becomes important. I think now more than ever, if we want to reach for a fair deal, certainly for lower pay, lower skilled roles, perhaps security officers and cleaning colleagues are in that bracket. The best way to continue to be able to afford to pay them, and pay them fairly for a job being done, and to reach for the best deal for them, is to look at productivity and efficiency. Is there technology, whatever that may be, that cannot replace human beings, and we're not looking to sort of save money. This is about mitigating the ever-increasing cost of employing large teams of people. So if you can become more efficient by using technology, if you can become more efficient by leveraging technology, there may be an opportunity through natural wastage to change the size and shape of a team, continue to deliver the service, pay people a fair wage for doing that work, but actually not see this ever upward spiral in cost. And I think sometimes the London living wage is seen as being this concept that could just pull costs associated with those cleaning teams, and other similar roles that sit in that area on an ever upward spiral, which is unappetizing for landlords. But I think we can intervene and say, well, look, let's get the best deal, but how can we work more efficiently? This doesn't need to be mass redundancies. This doesn't need to be cut costs, cut numbers of people. It's about cost mitigation, I think.
Okay, thank you for that. It was a sort of a side question there. I'm just going to ask you just quickly on what would you say is and I know a lot of people would say it's not such thing as a typical day, but what does a typical day look like for Mack?
I know the standard answer from colleagues in FM is there is no such thing as a typical day. I think there is a very typical day. It starts at 8 and it finishes at 6, and it's relentless.
Okay. Well, that's.
I think it's high tempo stuff all the way. And I think maybe why people say there's no typical day is, again, it's that point about variety. You can be talking to colleagues in different disciplines, providing different sorts of services. It's such a broad church. But, for me, the consistency is high tempo, complex, dynamic environment where change is the norm. I talk to my senior leadership team all the time about a culture of change culture, and be experimental. And I think that for me is a typical day. A typical day will mean arriving at work. I cycle to work, so I sort of arrive and get changed, and I'm sort of fresh and ready to go. But it means moving into top gear straight away.
Okay.
One doesn't spend a couple of hours drifting around, having nice conversations, thinking about where you're going to buy your coffee. It's in at the deep end from the get-go. And for me, it's leadership. It's about leadership. It's about leading from the front. Everybody else who's coming off night shift, who's arriving for the day shift, who's moving into construction sites, who's checking in to start doing security in the public realm with literally thousands of people around them with all sorts going on. They are there in that moment looking for a leadership team who gets it. So why wouldn't we arrive and get into top gear straight away? So for me, the typical day is high tempo, dynamic get-go from the minute you arrive. And that is typical.
Fantastic. So, now I would say, what would you say to someone by way of advice if they were starting their career off in the facilities management arena?
To balance, if I can describe it as vocational learning and academic,
okay.
I think there's now more than there certainly was when I started. Back in the early noughties, the BIFM existed. It's now the IWFM. I think a combination of learning through experience and learning through, hopefully, working for good managers who coach and share insights into the industry.
So mentorship as well with good people.
Because academic learning can't give you those insights into what makes people tick.
No.
You don't become, unfortunately, you can't buy experience, so you can't become a leader of a large, complex team just by going on some courses and perhaps interacting with some people and getting some qualifications. I think that's really important. I think a blend of both academic learning and on-the-job training is probably the way forward. I think these days there are recognized degree courses, there are diplomas. They didn't exist.
No.
There were one or two available in specific universities and colleges when I was sort of cutting my teeth many years ago. Nowadays, it's much easier to find an academic path in. But even at that point, if you arrive with a postgrad in FM, which you can do, a master's probably sort of business orientated, even then, you then got to arrive and start bolting on all the skills that are involved in communication and people management and leadership and all the more soft skills, human skills that are far more nuanced. So I think it's just a case of, taking those opportunities. I mean, my experience, whether it's valid or relevant now or not, I don't know. But my experience was leave those good impressions with people. Every day, every meeting, whether you're a passenger or a silent witness or a top contributor, they are all auditions for the future. And it is such a varied career. So one may be a security officer, as I was, having left the military, having left Sandhurst, and thought I was going to embark on a great career in London, and found that no one recognised what I'd done. We hadn't spent 2 decades fighting wars in the Middle East, so no one recognised my skill set. I was just a security officer, and I don't mean just a security officer because that's my view on security officers. That was my starting point, and I just walked through every door that was opened or partially opened, and I've ended up very fortuitously, and it is my privilege to be quite a senior, visible manager on a fantastic piece of real estate. So I think a combination of taking those opportunities, leaving the right impression, listening to and drawing down from coaches and mentors who are available to you, but also consider looking across the training organizations and the professional bodies who offer academic routes, because I think more and more these days employers are looking for qualifications that at least demonstrate the ability to learn and onboard information, to turn it around, to turn it into something, to write papers, to communicate it back in quite a complex environment.
I mean, do you mentor people in your team at the moment?
Yes.
Okay.
I've actually created with my head of people and culture a London Bridge City specific concept, which is LBC Next Gen.
Okay.
And every single member of my senior team, including myself, coaches, mentors actually probably is a better way of describing it. Somebody, and the process for identifying that is to the entire team, as I say, 300 strong, circa 300 strong. Everybody within London Bridge City was able to apply for Estate Director Next Gen, and they get for over a 6-month period, 2 hours a month to kind of experience what it's like to live in my shoes, for better or worse, actually. So they get those insights, and actually there is a reverse mentoring going on because, people like myself, my technical director, my head of people and culture, head of a place and community, they end up interacting with individuals who are from all across the team, all sorts of disciplines that you wouldn't ordinarily. You might say hello, and you might bump into them at a team meeting, or in other scenarios, you might see them in the property or as you cross the estate and say hi, which we always do. But you wouldn't spend time trying to explain to them what I do, what we do, and answering their questions, and it's quite enlightening.
I mean, that's an interesting point, because on our I think our 4th episode, a chap that I was interviewing, David Stevens from the NHS, does a similar thing. So that sort of reverse thing is a very enlightening concept. Looking now, I'm going to lump two of my questions really in together. With the sort of the COVID and stuff, but looking specifically at facilities management, has the way facilities management changed, I would say, over the years? And I think because my next question was sort of thinking about COVID as well, I'll allow you to lump the two together on this one.
I think it has changed. Some of those changes are quite subtle, but some of them I think are really material. I feel as though, having been in facilities management, property management, for the last 20 years that it's grown up, it's matured.
Okay.
Initially, we all worked alongside, in my case, primarily worked alongside chartered surveyors. And they had building managers. And then it started to build from there. And some of those businesses and those individuals didn't really know what FM was. And there wasn't a huge amount of guidance. There wasn't it wasn't a sort of discipline in its own right. It grew and it grew and it grew. And I think organizations like the BIFM made a big difference by actually saying that we are a distinct sector here.
Absolutely.
But it always felt a little bit like it was being pulled together, and some of it was really credible, some of it wasn't, and it was such a broad church. So I think what I mean by pulled together was that inevitably it had to allow for the lowest common denominator. And I mean, job titles aside, a building manager could be a building manager in a very small property, but a building manager could also be a building manager in a tower in the City of London. So I think over the last 20 years or so, I think the sector has matured out, and it is now a distinct sector, a specialist sector in its own right.
Okay.
And alongside that, not least the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, but also the IWFM have released papers and best practice that do actually articulate what is FM and what it does. So I think it's changed enormously, and that's been in response to there's a market. There's a market there for people to deliver services, oversee extended, quite complex supply chains, and to understand the linkage between people and what people expect and what people need, and the widest variety of services that are on offer out there to deliver to meet those expectations. So I think it's moved enormously, and COVID, I think, massively accelerated that maturing process in some respects, and it also challenged norms in a way that possibly we wouldn't have expected.
Correct.
In quite substantial ways. The question about whether or not agile working and working from home can actually be achieved for an operational facility manager remains a big question for us all. You can't manage a complex property from Surrey or Kent or Essex. You need to be in it. You need to be on it. You need to be having conversations with people. So I think there was a substantial amount of accelerated learning and a lot of thought leadership came out of the COVID period around FM, and I'm enjoying seeing the sector continue to mature to the extent that actually I think in a lot of cases now the emphasis is on the operational teams. The reliance is on the operational teams to be the experts in many respects, and the days of I need to be careful what I say here in terms of people that I work for, but I think the days of chartered building surveyors, general practice surveyors needing to be involved in everything are not, those days are behind us to some extent. I think the expectation is that perhaps people like me, operational experts, if I may say so, can take forward these big estates, these big portfolios. So I'm enjoying seeing the sector mature, and your questions earlier about how entry points into it for young people, possibly veterans leaving the services. These are all really interesting things to consider because it is ultimately a people business.
It's very much so. Moving on a little bit to how I'm sort of moving on more on the sustainability issues here, is that how important are sustainability issues with a supplier that you work with?
It's very important to us. We've got a sustainability policy. There is an overarching company-wide policy, as you would expect. London Bridge City has developed its own ESG policy and strategy. Sustainability is a huge part of that. We will be looking deep into the extended supply chain of a service partner to ensure that there isn't a sort of cosmetic approach to sustainability. one of the best tools, actually, I think, to achieve that is looking for ISO 14001, for example.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to be rolling it out. But I think there is a tendency, and I don't think it's necessarily particularly cynical, but there is a tendency for businesses to greenwash over these issues.
Yes.
We are looking for partners who
can demonstrate it.
At least demonstrate it, who are aligned to our policies, crucially. Mm-hmm. And I actually enjoy, and we have some businesses working with us now who do this and do it very well, and I welcome it. I'm actually looking for businesses to arrive and challenge me on sustainability. I think that's a healthy flip when you have in your sector a cleaning partner arrive who then says, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you doing this? And it makes the facility management team, my team, the operational team stand back and say, because we hadn't thought of it. And if you can do it, we'll embrace it. And that's a partnership, and it's very powerful. So sustainability is incredibly important to us, but authentic, sincere, genuine, reaching for an understanding of what that means in the extended supply chain, and not allowing ESG and other buzzwords and ideas and concepts that might be in vogue in the market at the moment to overtake us.
Yeah. And do you think, I mean, you've been 3 years at London Bridge City. Are you there yet on sustainability?
No. I think we will get there. I'm not suggesting that it's the pot of gold in the rainbow, but it takes time, it takes investment, it takes thought. There are always new opportunities arising for us to be more sustainable. I'd go back to the point, we were discussing earlier about culture. I think it's a cultural stance. Having that shared purpose, having that vision, understanding that the choices we make do have an impact on the climate, and that we are in a climate emergency. Just recognizing the fact that a local authority had declared a number of years ago a climate emergency, responding to that in a very considered way is important to us. We're not where we want to be. I think a lot of businesses aren't. The range of the number of areas of the operation that one can dive into to look to be more sustainable and have less impact it's almost infinite. I mean, how far do you want to go? And I think that leaves us hungry to continue to do better, continuous improvement, do better all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that all I would say is that, Hawkey Cleaning and Support Services in terms of sustainability looks at it from, an economic, social perspective, as well as that environmental. So it's all those three pillars. And we're not there yet, but we are certainly making some headway in that respect. Moving on to a question that I ask everybody, and it's always I think it gives a bit of a lump in everybody's throat, is what would you say is your biggest regret in your career to date?
Yeah, this is a difficult one for me. I remember hearing many years ago someone say, we don't regret the things that we have done. We regret not taking those chances, not doing things, because it's, I wish I had done that. I think I would start by answering this question by saying a choice I made when I was in the military, which was to leave my battalion and go down a slightly unusual route. Was having joined the army as a soldier, I then went to Sandhurst. And I did that because it was offered. Someone saw some potential. And I felt it was the right thing to do. And I pursued that, thinking it was career progression, believing it was something to reach for, something to attain. And probably thinking that it was a prolonged period of academic learning, lots of other learning as well, a lot of fitness, a lot of sort of military training, but primarily there's a lot of academic learning, a lot of leadership training. And I thought that must be a good thing to do. It's this exemplar center of excellence in terms of leadership training, generally, never mind within the constraints of the military. And I absolutely hated it. And for a number of reasons. Did
you finish it?
No.
Okay.
I did 2 terms. was utterly miserable. I think my fellow students knew I was, but they also knew that I'd already been a soldier for the best part of 5 years. And there were a number of reasons why I struggled with it, but I think I struggled because, well, there are the obvious things that I was being trained to do things that I'd been trained to do 5 years previously, and in some cases were qualified to instruct myself in terms of drill and small arms and so on and so forth. That was difficult, being in a learning environment and being taught again.
Okay.
I think everyone goes into that having been told you're going to find this difficult. You're going to be going back through a sort of 101 on things. But what I found more difficult than anything was that sort of classroom-based environment. I'd spent 5 years in the military, been all over the world, and I found myself back in an environment which I thought I wouldn't be back in. I didn't enjoy school. If I'm honest, I left school when I was 16. I didn't go to university or higher further education. So, and the reason I regret that is actually I shouldn't have done it in the first place. I was doing fine in terms of my career. What it taught me was, to stand back and think very carefully about the environment in which one needs to be in to succeed, and everyone learns in a different way at a different pace, and will feel more or less at home in different environments. It wasn't an environment where I felt I could succeed. Clearly, I've been very fortunate in my career to date, so I've done something right. But at that time, I felt that I'd been funneled into this center of excellence. Why wouldn't want to go there? Leaving it was incredibly difficult. People interviewing saying, maybe being interviewed by a very senior general who was quite well known. He was the commandant, and saying, why do you want to leave? And just saying to this exemplar senior officer, soldier, because I don't like it. I'm
not enjoying it.
I'm not enjoying it. It's very difficult. I should never have been there. I don't regret the opportunity, relatively proud of having done it. But what it taught me was, think carefully about where you're going and why. And I think the environment in which I am learning, my ability to contribute, the people I'm interacting with, and so on, are really important to me. I know what I'm good at, and I know who I am. And I think a lot of that comes from that quite difficult decision-making, leaving that environment behind and arriving in London not long afterwards was a hell of a thing to do. People saying, why on earth have you done that? Did you fail? Were you kicked out? What happened? And saying, no, I just really hated it. It wasn't for me. But I think it taught me a lot about what I do like. And so the flip of that.
So that will bring me on to Mac, on to my next question, is that what your greatest achievement in your career to date?
That's a tough one as well, isn't it?
Hopefully a little bit more upbeat.
Yeah, it's difficult. What's my greatest achievement? Can I pin that down to a single moment in time or a single event? I'm not sure I can. Perhaps where being here today to talk to you is a reflection of where I've arrived at in my career. I'm able to sit here and talk to you as the estate director at London Bridge City. I do think that where I am now, although it's tough and has been tough, it's an incredible privilege to be in the role I'm in. One of the prime privately owned estates in London, world-class stuff. The view.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah, the view north of the city and the location is genuinely world-class. So it is genuinely a privilege. But, it is also an achievement. I've worked hard for it. And that's what I would say to your listeners who may be thinking, how do I get into this? What is it? What does it mean? Is it the career for me? It's taken a lot of hard work, but my God, it's rewarding because what you can do by being a helpful, professional, articulate security officer in Mayfair in the early noughties is 20 years later be running one of the most prestigious privately owned property estates in London. So the opportunity is there. So I think that's probably my key achievement is just reflecting the fact that I've had a great career. I've worked hard for it. I'm proud of that. I don't think I should be. I don't think there's really not to be. There is one moment in my career that I it's not a regret. It's probably the best job I've ever had. And if I had won the lottery, I would still be there. after.
I think a lot of people say that, though, don't they?
For sure. I think so. But this is a particular point in time. I was so fortunate to work on a fixed-term contract for the Science Museum Group.
Okay.
So the Science Museum in South Ken. And I went there as head of estates. I knew the chap who was also there on a temporary basis or a fixed-term contract, sort of consultancy basis, overseeing all of that. And I went there not really knowing much about the museum sector or the heritage sector. It was working very closely with the Department of Culture, Media and Sport as a major sponsor. They had a lot of sponsors. They were modernising the museum. There was something genuinely philanthropic about it, and just an amazing space to be in. I have to say, arriving there with a coffee in the morning and walking through that space, because it didn't open until 10 o'clock in the morning, and thinking about being
sheer joy.
Very good way of putting it. Sheer joy. I used to walk through there, floating a few inches off the floor, walk through the aircrafts and walk through the rockets and all the other paraphernalia that they've collected with no one else there. No one else would turn up. The public weren't there until 10 o'clock in the morning. If I could do anything with my professional career, it would be to do a role like that. It was absolutely fantastic. Brilliant experience. I ran out of time and I moved on, and I have no regrets. I hasten to add, it's not a regret. It was a fantastic thing to be able
experience.
to do. Yeah.
So finally, this is just could be work or leisure. What things in life gives you, Mac, the greatest satisfaction and enjoyment?
Well away from work for this one for me. I think personally, I grew up in the Highlands of Scotland. Ironically, in some of the most least populated parts of Europe. And
then you came to London.
And I came to London. And at the time when I was growing up, to the age of about, into my early mid-teens, I had no idea what I had around me. I mean, there were some of the best mountain climbing, walking country in the world, I would say. And it was just on my doorstep. I'd just look out my window and see this stuff, and I had no idea what was there. I learned a lot about being outdoors in the military, and then arrived in London, and I suddenly realised I missed it. So what Mac's go-to is North Wales, the Highlands of Scotland, the Lake District. It's the outdoors. A weekend with a heavy pack.
Gosh, so it's really
climbing and walking,
wild stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, the outdoors is pure therapy, and not just because we live in a big bustling city, but because it just is something that I've learned to love, with or without people. Sometimes go in a group of mates or with a family, with my young boys. Sometimes go on my own. But yeah, the outdoors, there's nothing better than getting up a mountain, sometimes scrambling and climbing your way up it. So that's a massive love of mine. I don't get to do it as often as unfortunately, London is very flat and quite a long way away from those areas. But
we've got Primrose Hill. I think that's about it, isn't it? So, it sounds like a real sort of Bear Grylls experience there. So that actually brings us to the end of our fifth podcast, Wear Many Hats. We hope our listeners have found this interesting as I have. We'd like to thank Mac for taking the chair today. I think it's been both thought-provoking and engaging, and obviously we welcome the support and feedback from some of our listeners. Thank you once again for taking part.
No, thank you very much for your time. It's been very interesting. Thank you.